Tonight, a longer version of the conversation with Steve Bannon for the hour. When did you first know about and come to personally know Donald Trump?
It was really in 2010. A guy named Dave Bossie, Citizens United. I'd made a number of documentary films with Dave, starting right after the financial crash in 2009. Films focused on the Tea Party and the Tea Party revolt. And he called me up one day and said, well, I was actually making a film for him. He said, do you want to go to New York and meet Donald Trump? And I said, not particularly. I've got so much to do here. And I said, why? He said he's thinking of running for president. And I go, are you kidding me? Is that serious? And he goes, yeah. And so I said, fine, I'll go up. And he says, I'd like you to be able to talk about this kind of, you continue to talk about this populist movement. I'd like you to be prepared to talk about the populist movement, economic nationalism, and the Tea Party movement. And I said, fine. So I prepared some notes, and Dave went up and gave a very detailed presentation. Today, I realized it was on that famous 25th floor conference room. And given that President Trump is not a guy that likes to sit through long meetings, I mean, it took a long time. I think Dave and I were there for a couple hours at least. Dave went to a very detailed presentation of how you think about running for president, how you think about the primary process, how you think about the general election. He had a lot of details, and I chipped in. I had a segment on the Tea Party movement. I had a section on this kind of populist revolt.
And what was your impression?
Impression was I had never really been in the presence of a guy that had this kind of charisma. I mean, he was incredibly charismatic. He had an intuitive feel. We talked a long time about China. I bet you half the time I started talking about economic nationalism, he really understood China. He clearly had been talking about it for 20 or 30 years. I mean, very much like Lou Dobbs and Donald Trump to me are the guys I remember talking about China in the 90s, in the 2000s, and he had a deep understanding of that. He had a deep understanding about, really about the Tea Party movement. He kind of understood, he was following it very closely. One of the things about Trump, because he's very, he really understands how to kind of name things in a very deep way. You know, he studied Jung. You know, it's in one of his, I think, his third book.
Carl Jung.
He studied Carl Jung quite a bit, and you could tell because he kept saying, I kept saying populist, and he kept saying popularist, and I tried to kind of correct him. He said, no, it's popularist, and we kind of agreed to disagree, but I could see what his thinking was. So I left and I said, no way he's running for president in 2012. But this guy is a very serious guy. If you ever decide to do it, I thought it'd be very serious. And he did write a book. One of the things we recommended is that if you want to do this, you should get a policy book out there. And he wrote a book, I think it's in 2011, and I think the subtitle of the book was Make America Great Again. I think the title was Time to Get Tough. Make America Great Again or something like that. But the book, if you ever, and it's not one of the most famous of the Trump books, but it very much lays out what he ran on in 2015.
And the title was Make America Great Again.
I think the title was A Time to Get Tough, and I think the subtitle was like Making America Great Again. In that book had that phrase for the first time. I think I remember seeing it. And it's a very serious book. If people go back and look at the book, it came out in 2011, really had a very deep understanding of kind of his thoughts on trade, his thoughts on America and the world, his thoughts on taxes and what people would be. So in 2010, I didn't believe, I came to meet with Dave and I said, I don't think this guy's running for president anytime soon, but I definitely...
You thought he had possibilities?
Absolutely. I started keeping my eye on him. So I saw him go, Dave Bossie and others in CPAC would invite him to these speeches, these gatherings. I think the first one is maybe in 2011 at CPAC, and we had Breitbart at the time. I was also doing a radio show in Los Angeles. And I started watching him. Normally when I go in to see politicians, I try to sit in the back or the side to watch the crowd, how the response is. Because most of the times I've heard the speeches before. And I noticed something on Trump. There was a couple of things. He didn't speak like a politician. He had he talked in a vernacular that people could relate to. And I noticed that people would lean in to his speeches. I'd seen that on Sarah Palin, that they have a connection. They have a visceral connection with working class people. They have a visceral connection with the middle class that goes beyond politics. And that's one of the things I started following, telling guys, hey, I think this guy's going to be a serious guy.
In fact, you've called him the best orator you've seen since William Jennings Bryan.
It's a single reason I think that And I think that's why most, political consultants and strategists, I don't really pay a lot of attention to, guys on TV, et cetera, because I think they, by and large, have fallen into this thing of modern, I came out of Harvard Business School, one of the big focuses is kind of the Procter & Gamble's marketing, and they really have marketed candidates like products, right? And you can see all the tells that they have in that, and they try to form these guys, but they, the Frank Luntz words at work, you can't say certain words, and it gets so thin, so dry, that there's no real substance there. And I think today, I think it's one of the things the internet's given us is this search for authenticity, right? And Trump, I'm telling you, and I can't believe the media missed it. If you look on the campaign, I mean, these speeches, these crowds were barn burners, and each one had a different policy perspective in it. If you go back and look at the speeches, it really is the plan for the Trump plan. But his oratory, and it shows you how people yearn for this still. I mean, his oratory is very powerful. He is the greatest speechmaker, orator. Obviously, I think in modern political history, I think it's only been one, William Jennings Bryan, who was also a populist. But you cannot do 3, 4, 5 of these rallies a day and come in fresh and galvanize an audience. You go back, and if you were sitting there live, it was just incredible. I mean, the entire campaign, because we didn't have a lot of money, it wasn't really a modern campaign in the fact that we didn't do a lot of TV. We didn't do, I mean, we took the modern of data mining and targeting and all that, and couple it with an old-fashioned, just let's get this guy out and get him in front of the biggest crowd as possible. But the oratory is spellbinding. I think he's a spellbinding speaker. And if you look at the audience, they're engaged. I mean, how many people wait 8, 10, 12 hours in line? We used to do a thing at the end to bring up the person who was in line first. I mean, people would be there 24 hours. But then once you got inside, particularly if you're not seated and people wanted to be down in the mosh pit, people would stand for 3, 4, 5 hours waiting for this speech. I mean,
and that said what to you?
It said we've got something. I mean, one of the things we did when I first got to the campaign was to make sure we tracked Hillary Clinton very closely. And I noticed that, not only speeches were terrible, they didn't have any kind of theme, they weren't galvanizing, but we noticed that she went to Temple, started to go to these colleges, and we could tell that the kids are from the other Democratic schools around town that they're there because they're loyal Democrats and they're to see it. There was no rallying points, and he was the exact opposite. I think the speeches were clearly, touching people, hitting them. Shaw said only connect. He was connecting very hard.
The thing I noticed about his speeches is that he has a conversation with the audience.
Yes. Well, it's call and response a lot of times.
Yeah.
They know after a while where the call is, and they're going to do the lock her up, drain the swamp.
You approved of all that.
CNN sucks.
You agreed with all those points?
Absolutely. I thought they were all terrific. They were all key. They were all key.
Including lock her up?
Well, one of the things in coming to the campaign, and that's why, I don't know why people had to have meetings with other countries, but I thought there was more than enough there. I was the head of the group with Peter Schweitzer, the great author, and you guys have had him on 60 Minutes a couple of times, of Crony Capitalism. And we took, I think, 2.5 years of Peter's team of investigators to do Clinton Cash. And there was clearly enough, there that I think you could do all types of, if you drill down further. So yeah, I think it's definitely for investigations. I'm not one to politicize stuff, but I think that
But are you suggesting that somehow she ought to be vulnerable to an indictment now?
I definitely think that there should be further investigations. I think the Uranium One situation alone should have a much deeper investigation. I think the whole Clinton Global Initiative, the whole Clinton...
this is the fundraising aspect.
They had both the merchant banking and the investment banking arm. I think those things ought to really be looked at for Bill Clinton and herself, particularly her time as Secretary of State. And I'm not one to politicize this. I'm not saying let's go after Hillary Clinton, just to Hillary Clinton. One of the core tenets of the populist movement is that and this is one of the things I made sure I put into the speeches about her, what I told President Trump at the time, this campaign it's very simple. She's the standard bearer for a corrupt and incompetent status quo. And you're the agent of change. You're the agent of change that Obama didn't deliver. Okay, you're an agent of change. If we always have her as a foil, she's the status quo, you're the agent of change. You're going to win this thing. And if you have to make that decision, because the math was there, you saw already, it was like 2/3 wrong track, right track. I think 70% of the American people thought the country was in decline, particularly economic decline. So all the underlying substrate of an electorate that wanted change, and it was a change election, was there. And if you force her to defend the status quo, if you force her to kind of this permanent political class that has a grip, regardless of party affiliation, has a grip on this city and has a grip on a nation, if you make her the tribune of that and do a compare and contrast, you're going to win.
But isn't it sad that we're getting to a point in which people are calling for the other side to be put in jail and to be indicted?
You don't want to politicize this. I mean,
well,
I
that's
think
exactly what we're doing.
But look at President Trump. I mean, one of the things I continue to say, you talk about a repudiation or a nullification of an election. I mean, look at President Trump. I mean, not only do you have a special prosecutor in the Justice Department, a couple of grand juries, you have on Capitol Hill, right, with Republican leadership, you have 3 separate committees. I think you have 2 in the Senate and 1 in the House. And they're investigating him and sending out subpoenas, and they've had some big breaks already. So
this is a Republican-controlled Congress.
I know, but look at that for a second. That's what I'm saying. If you look at the nullification of this election, it's one of the reasons I left the White House and talked to the president about it. I think he needs air cover in this. I think if you look at this, the nullification of this election, I don't think it's coming from the left. Yeah, you have the Democratic Party and you have the corporatists and you have all this, and I kind of think they're second or third tier, as I'm sure we'll get into. But principally, the Republican leadership has allowed 3 committees to go and principally be run by Democrats. I think Adam Schiff's running the House committee. I see him on TV all the time. Looks like Mark Warner's running the Senate committee and not Senator Burr. Can you imagine? Let's just take in political physics. Can you imagine if Hillary Clinton would have won and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi were the heads of the Senate and the House, that you would have 3 committees investigating President Hillary Clinton? And you would actually have Republicans running those committees? Of course you would.
This gets us into policy discussions about the Russian probe. Let me defer that for a second and go back to the campaign. At the time that you met Donald Trump, impressed by him,
yes,
impressed by his curiosity, impressed by his attention, was he at that time talking about the birther issue? This is 2010.
Never brought it up.
Never brought it up.
Never brought it up. Later, he did approach me, and we talked. It was not the birther issue. He did approach me about putting up, and I think this came out, he later did it, but if myself and some donors would be interested in matching for not a fund, but a reward for like Occidental College, if they turned over President Obama's college records, that there would be some sort of donation of $2 million or $5 million. And I think that it never came together, but I think right before the 2012, I think he actually did a video in his office where he actually said, I'll put up $1 million if, I think it was Occidental College would put up the funds. But I've never had any conversation with him at all. We talked about the birther. In fact, on the campaign, I think it was in September, October, we actually had that session where he went to his hotel and said, President Obama was born in the United States. I've never had any conversation with him.
But that came after a long period of making it a big public issue for him.
Andrew Breitbart was very famous, and our site was very famous of not being a birther site. In fact, the first time, at the first Tea Party convention in 2009, I think it was, 2009 or 2010, early 2010, where Sarah Palin kicked it off in Nashville, Tennessee. The opening night was my film, Generation Zero, and Andrew introduced it. And he and Joe Farah actually got into a tussle later where one of the Washington Post reporters got it because Joe Farr had gotten up and given a thing. He had actually started, I think, with the Gospel of Matthew, went through all the lineage of Jesus, and then he said, even Jesus Christ needed a birth certificate, and the place went crazy. Andrew and him got in it later, so we were not. Our site was not birthers. We were not birthers, but I never heard. So
birthing was not an issue for you and something you believed in.
Look, the paper and everything in Hawaii, it boggled the imagination it could happen. By the way, but I know people that ran around and were talking about Social Security numbers, and it was a big item for a while, but it was never. My issue as President Obama was never where he was born. My issue as President Obama were his policies, not where he was born. But I never heard President Trump ever mention that one time.
How did you get involved in the campaign?
Well, I had I never spent much personal time with Trump. Even at CPAC, when he would have a suite, it would be like my sister would go up there as people of the company. So I probably didn't spend 15 minutes in the interim years with Donald Trump personally. He came on my radio show and obviously on the pages of Breitbart. It was in, if I go back really to 2013 or in January, in fact, at this very table, I had a meeting with Jeff Sessions and his young aide-de-camp, Stephen Miller. And this was right after the 2012 defeat. And we had a dinner, and we laid out, the RNC was coming out with the autopsy report, which said that you had to go to something like Gang of Eight, amnesty, all this. It became the kind of the lexicon of the Republican Party. And I had read a analysis in Real Clear Politics by Sean Trendy that talked about how working class people had not come out and voted for Mitt Romney, and that would have made the difference that they had. And so I started doing just some analysis about what a working class movement and this populist movement, what it could really do in a general election. Had a dinner with Jeff Sessions, who was kind of the agrarian populist that was really the spiritual head of this movement. And I talked about two things. I said, look, trade is number 100 on the list of issues. Nobody ever talks about it. And immigration is like 2 or 3. But if we ran a campaign that really focused on the economic issues in this country and really got people to understand how trade is so important and immigration are inextricably linked, about the suppression of wages for the working class and really pulling down the middle class, we could really set this thing on fire. And I said, look, you're not going to win the primary and you're not going to be president of the United States, but it's a way for us to use this as a vehicle to get it into the general conversation. And Senator Sessions said, I agree 100%. I'm not the guy, but I agree with you. But that person will arrive. And so I started really...
And then he became the early supporter of Donald Trump.
Intellectually, always. I mean, because it was just intellectually, you could tell this movement that was going on. Remember, we had the huge battle in 2013 for immigration, which was really the civil war of the Republican Party. It was the Gang of Eight, and I think it was in June or July, finally got voted down, I believe, in the House. And it was just... it was really tore the party apart, I think, a lot. The following year, Eric Cantor, as the majority leader, first time in American history, got defeated in a primary by a guy who raised $200,000, Dave Bratt, on the issue of immigration and these trade deals. And so we could see this was going to get traction. I was following Trump at the time and the other candidates at these small forums. And you can see that Trump was starting to talk about these issues, particularly talk about trade with China, talking about NAFTA, talking about the bad trade deals. People, I could see the applause. I could see, because no other Republican would talk like this. They were all free trade guys, right? And he would talk about immigration. He would talk about what we had to do with illegal immigration.
But he didn't just talk about it. I mean, he talked about it in the most graphic terms, calling people who were coming from Mexico rapists. That was when he made the announcement.
That's when he made the announcement. I think if you go back and look at these other speeches he was making it in he was making a case of a policy case, right? And he was doing it with his... Remember, he does not speak like a politician. He speaks in a very plain-spoken vernacular. Here's the thing I took away from it. It resonated with people like you couldn't believe. No other Republicans were talking about this. Remember, they had a standard doctrine of free trade and kind of limited government, and I'm not saying all that's wrong. Free trade, obviously, I don't agree with, but it was just not resonating. And then in 15 led to early 16, or to 14 led to 15. And you can see when Trump announced, because I think he was like 5th or 6th in the polls when he announced, because nobody thought he was serious. When he announced, it was galvanizing. And of course, the media bit right away on the comments about illegal immigration, and blew it up to the thing that it galvanized everybody to focus on exactly what he was talking about. And then from then on, and it was interesting that...
But you were not part of the team by then.
No, we were running Breitbart, but I could tell this was something. So look, we're like a throwback to the newspapers in the 19th century. We have very set beliefs at our media operation. We're populists, we're economic nationalists. We believe in America first. We don't believe in a lot of foreign intervention that's not in the vital national security interests of the United States. So Trump was really, and we had others, Huckabee, and there were other populists out there. Ted Cruz had a huge following for a while. But we noticed, like even in the first debate, and we kind of had a classic battle with Fox News in the very first debate when Megyn Kelly jumped Trump, with his Twitter feed and what had been on the Facebook page or whether it was in The Apprentice. We had kind of a break with Fox. We could tell that Fox was trying to run interference for the traditional Republican candidates, whether that was Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or these more traditional candidates, and they were trying to go after Trump.
So how did you become the CEO of the campaign?
What happened is that, after the convention and then after President or Hillary Clinton's convention, it was in mid-August, there was an article by Maggie Haberman on a Saturday morning in the New York Times that really talked about how his campaign was in disarray, it was falling apart, the campaign guys didn't think they could talk to him, he was very unhappy, etc. And so, you know, I did some checkings. I got the paper, Saturday paper at 7 in the morning. I'm sitting at Bryant Park, reading my paper, drinking my coffee at 7. And this thing looked a lot worse because we weren't intimately involved in the Trump campaign. We were following it. And we knew the numbers were looking bad. You know, you had the Khan situation, you had the Judge Curiel situation. And I started calling around looking at the numbers, and guys are saying, look, it's 12 to 16 points down, and this is looking bad. And the Republican establishment that weekend, you know, was looking to say, hey, we're going to cut this guy loose. This guy's going down, and we got to save the House. We have to save the Senate. I talked to a couple of the investors in Breitbart, Bob and Rebecca Mercer, and, you know, talked to them about it. And as Rebecca and I talked, we basically said, you know, we knew Kellyanne Conway very well. She had run the super PAC for the Mercers, for Ted Cruz. She was now a pollster.
And the Mercers had been supporting Ted Cruz.
Had to $25, $30 million.
Right.
And, but by the way, they had come over and were huge Trump people. They had actually met, I think Rebecca had met with Ivanka and Jared back in June and just wanted to say, hey, we're going to put in the same, you know, we're going to put in some serious money into a super PAC. We really support him. And we talked and said, and he talked and he said, what do you think? And I said, look, this guy can win. There's no doubt in my mind, 100% certainty if it just stays on this populist economic message that got him through the primaries.
The unspoken deal was that you could show him how to win as a populist. But the deal for you was that you would get an opportunity to see a populist agenda enacted from the White House.
That deal was never, no, it's never it was really, hey, you are a populist, you're an economic nationalist, you have these beliefs, because they're Donald Trump's beliefs. All we have to do is
highlight them. You
highlight
didn't have to convince him to
No,
be popular.
no. His default position, by the way, if you go back into the primary the entire time, these are all coming up. He talks about this all the time. It just hadn't really been, in fact, in the acceptance speech at the convention, you see a very powerful, I call it the Wittenberg Cathedral speech. I thought he nailed, you know, the speech was looked at as being artless. I thought the exact opposite. I thought it was like a jackhammer. He was
because
it was
he hit all the points that you wanted to hit.
It was just powerful. He was just hitting populism,
immigration, trade,
the basic core, and it was relentless. And in fact, I remember
attacking the establishment.
And I was watching CNN afterwards because I was doing the radio show from there. I was watching CNN, and they were all saying the worst acceptance speech ever. It didn't show unity, didn't have that uplifting rhetoric of bonding America. And then I think they went to a panel, and you know the panel was like 70%. We loved it. It really got to us. He told us what he was going to do. So you could see if he could pierce that shell. And that was the whole thing with it. Look, when Trump says he's his own strategist, he is his own strategist. To a degree, he's a guy that really knows the world. And so this was just very simple. It was just to make sure we took away all the other nonsense away from the campaign and just focused on his core message, which he had, by the way, it's something he's talked about for 30 or 40 years. It's to the core of his being. All we had to do, and he had won in the primaries, is just set up a system to basically compare and contrast himself with Hillary Clinton. She's the standard bearer of a corrupt and incompetent status quo. Okay, I'm the agent of change. I'm the agent of change you thought you got in Obama, but you didn't.
What did he expect from you, and what did you expect from him?
I think he just expected him as just he was going to be just the candidate he could be.
But did you see him as a guy who could give voice to this economic nationalism?
Yes, he could.
That you had believed in?
Yes, absolutely. We saw that from the beginning. I mean, that's why the site itself, a year and a half, when he came down, you know, Breitbart said they started going Trump art, but we finally saw an individual, somebody in the political arena that could articulate and particularly touch the American working class people within this vernacular and actually get a response out of it.
And did you bring him a certain constituency that he might not have reached?
In the primaries, no doubt. I mean, he had a guy named Sam Nunberg that worked for him for years. But Sam Nunberg was the guy that had the Facebook controversy in the summer of '16 that was let go. Nunberg had been very close to us for a long period of time. And he made sure Trump saw the Breitbart stuff. The Breitbart audience at that time was this kind of populist economic nationalist, but had a tremendous amount of limited government conservative.
You've been attacked for what was on Breitbart because people looking for ways to characterize you look at the things that are on Breitbart.
So it's total nonsense. Let's talk about that for a second. You know, we put up 250 to 400 pieces of material a day. I've got sites in Jerusalem. I've got sites in London. We have video sites a day, and they pick a handful of satirical headlines to pick it up. Let's talk about the one they say. Bill Kristol, renegade Jew, right? That's a story written by, it's a headline picked by one of the most prominent conservative Jewish writers in our country, David Horowitz. He wrote a 2-part series, and he was calling Bill Kristol a renegade Jew because of not supporting the state of Israel enough. This is what the left throws up. I mean, to say that we're the most pro-Israel site, the most pro-Israel site in this country is Breitbart. The most anti-BDS site in this country is Breitbart. The one that has the protection of young Jewish kids on college campuses is Breitbart. The one that's done more articles on the plight of the Jews of Europe is Breitbart. And so when they say anti-Semitic, the reason I don't attack them, by the way, I'm giving one of the keynote addresses to the Zionist Organization of America in the fall, introducing Sheldon Adelson, being introduced by the ambassador from Israel, Ron Dermer.
Right.
The reason I've never defended myself against any of this, or even Breitbart, is when the left is in that cul-de-sac of identity politics, we're winning.
You believe that if, in fact, somebody's talking about racial identity and identity politics rather than economic issues, they lose?
Let me give you the perfect example, 100%. Here's the example. When I was announced on Monday or Tuesday, after that Saturday and Sunday with Trump, the mainstream media and the left go, Trump is down 16. We know he's heading to 20. The Clinton campaign knows it's over for him. Okay, he knows it's over for him. He brought in a bomb thrower. And he brought in this guy Bannon. What's this guy Bannon going to do? Bannon's going to wreak havoc on all his enemies on the way down. This is Trump's, it's all going to be vengeance, right? And what you saw was the exact opposite. A highly disciplined, focused campaign on going to certain areas we knew we had to go to with that message every day of populism and nationalism.
In the industrial Middle West.
Yes, industrial Midwest, but also in North Carolina. One thing. About a week later, Hillary Clinton, who had been with all her fat cats in the Hamptons and Silicon Valley doing nothing but raising money, right, the entire time, she comes out to give her first speech since I was announced. So I go into the war room we had with TVs all over and all my young team there. You know, Jason Miller, Andy Sarabian, Stephen Chung were sitting there on every TV, and she comes out and she goes, it's the Breitbart, Bannon, white supremacist, alt-right speech. And I sat there right then and told the crowd, I said, we got her. If that's where she's going to go, we got her. She's done. We're 15 points down. And right there I said, she's reconfirmed to me. She has no earthly idea what she's doing. She has no earthly idea where this country is. Trump's message in Trump, we can beat her. And I thought at the time we could actually beat her big. Maybe not 300 electoral votes, but I said we can beat her. They walked into a trap. America does not think it's a racist country. People don't. You saw in Houston. This is the greatest country in man's history of how we pull together. People don't think they're racist. And she's sitting up there with identity politics at this time when the elites in this country have had an economic hate crime. You want to talk about hate crimes? Economic hate crime on the working class people in this country. That's a hate crime. How the industrial base in this country has been eviscerated in the elites, the ascended economy of Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Hollywood, and Washington, D.C., and she's got the gall to sit up there and talk about that. That's exact. Her whole defeat was summarized in that first day she came back. Her whole defeat. And we knew it. And that's what we just drove.
So were you not surprised?
Were you? By the way, I love it when they go to identity politics. I said this the other day. And Schumer and these guys, the smart guys, the populists on their side, they had that conference a couple of weeks ago. They came out and they said, we know, the conference, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, it came out with, I think, the better deal. And they said at the time, Chuck Schumer, and the guys around him, I think one of his top guys, of course, said, hey, Bannon's the guy who gets economic populism. He came out, the whole thing. They say, we're not talking about identity politics, we're not talking about race, we're talking about economics. And we deconstructed that thing, and Trump's already got programs for all of it. So they're trying to go after the core Trump program because they understand. Bernie Sanders understands, Sherrod Brown understands, Tim Ryan understands, Seth Moulton understands, Tulsi Gabbard understands that that's what can win in this country.
Would those people have beaten Donald Trump, you think?
I think if Sherrod Brown had been one of the sighs of relief I had, it was when Sherrod Brown was not picked as her running mate. We would have still won. And we would have still won.
But if Sherrod Brown had been the candidate in
2016,
you would have lost.
I don't think we would have lost.
You would not have been able to pick up that audience.
I think we would have still, no, Trump would have still won because he still comes encumbered. He still comes encumbered with a lot of the social stuff. I think in 20, I think if Sherrod Brown had been the VP, is what I'm trying to say, instead of Tim Kaine, it would have been much harder.
Trump has made the point that when you talk about the contribution of Steve Bannon, that he'd already won a number of primaries. How do you measure your contribution to this campaign?
It was a total team effort. You know, Jared Kushner was really my partner at the top level. We had Kellyanne Conway. We brought in, you know, first call I made was to Reince Priebus to get the RNC up there. Katie Walsh, Sean Spicer, hired Dave Bossie to run with Katie Walsh day to day. So it was a huge team effort. Jason Miller, comms. We had a fabulous team. Contribution, I think, was just kind of pulling the team together and saying, hey, because I was from day one, we have a 100% chance of winning this. What I used to tell the guys at Breitbart before I left, Napoleon told his marshals one time, when you set out to take Vienna, take Vienna.
They did.
And that's what the philosophy
What is it about you and fascination with military biography and military leaders?
I come from a, you know, Norfolk, Virginia, and Richmond. You know, Norfolk's a Navy town. We were a Navy family and a blue-collar working-class family around the base. In Richmond, as you know, coming from the South, it's imbued with history of the Revolution and the Civil War, all the great contributions from World War II. So it's just a thing as a kid. You know, I knew I was going to be I knew I was going to go in the military. I went to military prep school. My kid brother's a Navy pilot.
Yeah, but you're beyond that. When you go look at your library, you see a lot of books about military stories, a lot of books about biography. I mean, it is the library of someone who is enormously curious about history.
Well, I am, because I think if you want to make an impact in the world, you have to understand both institutions and I think the flow of history. And one of the ways to do that is through the lives of great men and women, particularly the struggles. And what you find when you study it is that every one of them that became great over time or beloved over time had insurmountable obstacles in front of them and what they had to do to overcome those. And that's what I picked up from history, and also the cycles of history, that certain times, you know, like the Bible says, there's going to be certain times of unity and there's going to be certain times of disruption. And in those cycles of history, you have to know, I think the study of history allows you to see that. One of the greatest advantages I think I have, even in this town, is that from a very early age, you know, like 9 to 10 years old, I started reading serious history. My mother, you know, got serious history books for me. And it's amazing, whether it's Wall Street or even in Washington, which is pretty shocking, is people really don't have a deep understanding of history, and particularly the flows of history and the rhythms of history.
Donald Trump?
Donald Trump has an intuitive sense of people in moments. You know, people say, hey, is Donald Trump smart? Not only is he smart, he went to Wharton, I went to Harvard, so I'm more on the poet side of MBAs. He's more on the mathematical, because Wharton's really known as the finance school. He's got something very unique about smarts, and that is applied intelligence in situations of immense pressure. You know, he always says, I don't choke. He's a money player. And I've seen him on so many situations where the pressure's been on, and he's had to think through a situation and deliver. Okay,
let me bring you to Billy Bush. How did both of those things, that analysis, apply to Billy Bush? Take us inside the dilemma that he faced.
Well, when we first got the tape on Friday afternoon from, I think it was the Washington Post, he and I came to the same conclusion, and Jared and other people, that, look, this was locker room talk. This was two guys on a bus or a dressing room years and years and years ago. This is not the guy that people know, and people know Donald Trump. So we dismissed that out of hand of any of this over the top. And we thought the reaction would be so over the top from the mainstream media and from the left. And so that night we did a little video, right, to kind of explain his situation. And then the next day, what happened, particularly in the morning, was that a number of people started to drop off the campaign. People started saying, you know, they weren't going to support Donald Trump.
Governor Christie?
Well, that came later. I think what happened is that we had a meeting up at Trump Tower, and, you know, Reince came and some other people, advisors were there. And, you know, Reince, who's a fantastic guy, but I think really at that time was representing where the donors in the Republican Party were. He was incredibly upset. Reince had been with us the day before, came back. And Trump went around the room and asked people the percentages he thought of still winning and what the recommendation. And Reince started off, and Reince said, you have two choices. You either drop out right now or you'll lose by the biggest landslide in American political history. And Trump, with his humor, goes, that's a great way to start our conversation. We went around the room, and I could tell from the incoming of politicians, and I could tell from some of the politicians that were there, is that the natural inclination of politicians are to be so overwhelmingly stunned and shocked by how the media comes on you. But Trump wasn't that. And I told him, as he went around, I was the last guy to speak, and I said, it's 100%. You have a 100% probability of winning. And that's the first time.
But you seem to have done that at every point in the campaign. When he was in trouble, asking him to double down on his rhetoric, double down in terms of appealing to his base.
Appealing to the American people and to the working class people in this country, absolutely. You know why? Because it was a winner. That's why I told him double down every time. And on that day, that's the first time and only time he ever got upset with me. He goes, come on, it's not 100%. I go, it's absolutely 100%. And I told him why. They don't care. They don't care about your rhetoric.
The American people don't care about how you talk about women that way.
They don't care about locker room talk. When the average American, I think 50% of Americans have $400 in their pocket. Charlie, you've been out in the Midwest in this country. You've seen your own home state of North Carolina has been gutted with manufacturing jobs, the furniture industry, the apparel industry.
Of course they care about that.
No,
everybody knows they care about that, and they care about that deeply, and it's a primary concern, because if you can't take care of your family, then you're in huge problem.
Not just
in terms of your own self-respect and in terms of the dignity of your work.
Exactly. And that's why J.D. Vance...
But they do care about values, and they do care about respect for women. They do,
and
you
know
that. And it's not just locker room talk.
That's locker room talk. The Billy Bush thing is locker room talk. By the way, we have empirical evidence to prove this. He got 44% of the female vote.
Did you lose confidence of anybody because they came at you at that point and said, look, he ought to get out of this race, other than Reince Priebus?
Billy Bush Saturday, to me, is a litmus test. It's a litmus test. And I said it the other day to General Kelly during the Charlottesville thing afterwards. It's a line I remember from the movie The Wild Bunch. William Holden uses it right before that huge gunfight at the end. When you side with a man, you side with him, okay? The good and the bad. You can criticize him behind, but when you side with him, you have to side with him. And that's what Billy Bush weekend showed me. Billy Bush Saturday showed me who really had Donald Trump's back to play to his better angels. All you had to do, and what he did, was go out and continue to talk to the American people. And we have empirical evidence that I'm correct and you're not. And here's what it is. Not only did he win, he got 44% of the female vote. People didn't care. They knew Donald Trump was just doing locker room talk with a guy, and they dismissed it. It had no lasting impact on the campaign. Yet, if you see the mainstream media that day, it was literally he was falling into Dante's Inferno. And I realized that two things. Number one, traditional politicians will run for the hills. Trump's not a traditional... People don't understand something. The mainstream media and the Democratic Party were not trying to defeat Donald Trump. They were trying to destroy Donald Trump. They were trying to destroy him and what he stood for, okay? And they went about it in a no-holds way. They tried to destroy him. People do not understand the courage this man has and the will this man has. There was no reason. You know why he ran? You know why he ran? People said, oh, he ran for duty for his country. He's a billionaire. He's got an incredible wife. He's got an incredible family. He's got a great business. He's got every star in the world coming to him. He's got probably, if you look at the material life, the most perfect life you have. Why would you give that up to go out and be destroyed?
Can I list for you about 1,000 billionaires who would do the same thing if they thought?
Absolutely not.
I can tell you,
1,000 billionaires all have
if they thought that they could get the presidency, would go for it.
It's not get the presidency. You have to know what you're going to go through to get it.
That's a different question.
But that is the question. He knew at the beginning when he came down that escalator. Look at what happened the next day after he came down the escalator. They went to destroy him that next day. It's the reason.
Are you trying to destroy someone when you simply describe what they have said?
They're not describing what he said. If you look at what they said, it was much more.
If you run the tape, which is a news item, that's not trying to destroy somebody. That's simply trying to report.
Charlie, give me a break. If you look at this, let's go back and look at the social media and the Twitter accounts of all the young reporters following Trump on the campaign, of how they were coordinating with each other, how they were the opposition party. That day on CNN and MSNBC, that's not just reporting the news. That has panel after panel after panel in an onslaught, and we knew that, and we knew that we could. And here's the way to defeat it. You know what he did? He was advised, oh, go in 60 minutes. You know, have your wife and your daughter sitting on the couch. You know, apologize, do all this, do that, go on TV that night. He went down, when we actually were in the room, he says, no, I'm going to go down. He took the elevator down. I think there were 10,000 people in the streets. He went down, Secret Service went crazy. He went outside and talked to his followers. And we went back on the campaign that following. You know, we had the Sunday night, we had the debate in St. Louis. The famous debate where we brought the women, the Clinton accusers.
That was your deal?
100%.
You wanted to do that for a while?
100%.
Why?
because I thought if you're going to go after Donald Trump for his words, let's have the Clintons defend Clinton's actions. Those women wanted to confront Clinton for the longest period of time, and yes, I was very prepared.
Been looking for an opportunity.
I was very prepared to give them the opportunity, and boy, we had one in that debate because we had the trap set, and they walked into it. Only at the last second did the
debate
organizers. We almost had a fist fight, and it was pulled
between you and whom?
Well, it was fair. It was really our lawyer, Don McGann at the time, and I think Fahrenkopf and McCurdy or whoever the guy is. It was because what they had allowed to happen with Mark Cuban at the other debate. They had promised us that Mark Cuban wasn't going to be in the line of sight, that Cuban was going to be 4 or 5 rows back, because Cuban had made a big deal about getting Trump's head. And at the very last second, they put him right down there. And I went to those guys and I said, because Rudy and I had cut the deal beforehand, I said, how was this? And they said, well, we can't control it. We don't have security control it. We know a guy can do what he wants to do. So when we tried to pull the same thing, and I had the women, the accusers, sitting right in that VIP box, Bill Clinton had to walk right past them on national TV to start the debate. And guess what? They were going to confront him.
What does this say about Steve Bannon?
He's a good counterpuncher. I'm a fighter. I'm a street fighter. Okay? I'm a street fighter. And if I'm in a fight, I'm going to win. And Donald Trump's a street fighter.
And you'll do whatever is necessary to win.
Inside the bounds of decency. Is that not inside the bounds of decency? To allow the accusers of Bill Clinton, these women, to actually have a shot to confront him? Is that outside the bounds? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's something that's needed to be done for a long time. The Clintons are so high and mighty, and they accuse Donald Trump, and their campaign, specifically, if they had not gone after, and the mainstream media and the left had not gone after to try to destroy Donald Trump, particularly for something like language, okay, then it would have been different. But no, they want to play like that. They're going to have to. We will ratchet up the stakes. They're the guys that did the Cuban situation. That was the whole thing to get in Trump's head. Okay, so you want
the
to
Mark Cuban thing.
Mark, I said, you want to be cute on Mark Cuban? I'll see you and I'll raise you one.
I want to move to a transition. I want to move to the government.
By the way, we rattled her. You could tell. She was rattled. We know from her campaign and he was rattled.
But we got to him. Didn't she win by all the debates?
No, absolutely not. No way.
Who won the debates?
The first debate, and our strategy in the first debate was to mitigate our downside risk on policy. I think it was even. I think it was a draw.
All right, so even the first, the second debate.
Said we won, hands down, not a question. St. Louis, the town hall, we won, hands down. I don't think it's any question. I think he fully dominated the space. Her new book actually says, I wish I had confronted him more. She actually says in her book, she wished she had gotten, he was in her space, she wanted to get there. I think in that question and answer, I think it was spectacular. Third, I think it was a draw to us up slightly. But remember, the debates were where she was going to show. We divided the campaign into 3 sections. The first was from mid-August until the first debate. We're 16 down. More importantly, we're only 70 on the generic ballot, which basically generic ballot's a Republican ballot. You have to be at 90. 9 out of every 10 registered Republicans have to vote for you. I think Trump was at 70 because a lot of Republicans saying he's not a Republican, he's not my guy. That time from mid-August until the morning of the first debate, we closed. And on Morning Joe that Monday morning, I think it was the Bloomberg pollster, and I think Joshua Green came out and said we were inside the margin of error of being up 1 or 2. We had closed the entire gap. The second part of the campaign was the 3 weeks of the debates. But remember, in the 3 weeks of debate, and we planned on it, she was supposed to crush Donald Trump because she was a policy wonk. She knew this. She was a much experienced
debater. You think Comey made a difference?
The Comey report, irrelevant.
Really?
Totally irrelevant. 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 Maybe reinforced a little bit her corruption, but it was irrelevant. The emails. It was Clinton cash, and I think the greed and venality of the Clintons that were much bigger, and the negative side. That's what we always focus on. That's what I say. You don't need these meetings. These meetings these guys took. You don't need meetings. You had all the information you needed. The Comey thing, I think, was background noise. Total. Complete. We never on the campaign. We never focused on it.
America didn't care about the emails.
They didn't care enough. They didn't care as much as I cared. You know why the emails are important? The emails are important because of Clinton cash. The emails show you they're smart. Those emails are the personal emails that show all the coordination with the speeches and all the favors that done. Remember when she went into the Secretary of State, who were the people that didn't trust her? Obama, who you can say a lot about Obama, and I do, but he's an incorruptible guy as far as standard political corruption of cash. Okay, the Obama guys and John Kerry on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. What did they make her do? They made her have that agreement that before Bill Clinton or you guys do anything you think, you're going to notify us first and get our permission. right? She had to sign a document that said that. That wasn't the right. That was Obama, and that was John Kerry as a sine qua non of her confirmation. And by the way, after she signed it, she never gave him anything. The 33,000 emails has all the Clinton cash stuff in it. So I would love to see the 33,000 emails. But was it essential? No, it's not essential, because you can make the case how corrupt they are without them.
Okay, we've established the campaign. Were you surprised you won?
I said it was 100%. In fact...
No, I know you said that, but were you surprised? Was Donald Trump surprised on the day that the election that he won?
The third phase of the campaign was the 3.5-week sprint to the finish, okay, doing it every day. He could see the momentum picking up. He was an absolute believer we were going to win.
She believed she had the momentum.
That shows you how clueless they were. You know, you see on
they had the momentum until the last time that Comey came out because of Weiner's, because of the Weiner issue, and then when Comey came out and made the announcement about
You're not looking at the data.
That turned and halted their campaign.
You look at hang on. You look at the data in these places like Youngstown, Ohio, and these other places where you could see that this working class base was coming back to us. The guy Jake Sullivan is the one voice in their campaign. If you read the books, Jake Sullivan's sitting there going, "Hey, I see where Bannon and Kushner is putting this guy. I see the speeches. Look where they're going." Who told me that also was Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban said, "Hey, Cuban says, I kept telling him, you got to get to Western Pennsylvania. You got to get Obama out there more. You got to get Obama to places where he won big. You're not using him. You got to get more." And he said the weekend beforehand, he knew they were in trouble. He gets a phone call and says, "What are you doing Saturday?" He goes, "What do you mean?" He says, "Can you come to Pittsburgh and open for her? We need a big crowd." And she has a tough time drawing crowds because she doesn't excite people. She has no message. He went to Pittsburgh and he said, "I knew they were in trouble. I knew they're in trouble in Western Pennsylvania." He said, "Don't give me Comey and don't give me anything. We knew the momentum was on our side closing." Now, I tell you how much we thought we were going to win. Roger Ailes calls me up like a week or before, or something like that, and it was all this thing in the press every day, Trump TV, because Trump's going to lose by 10 points. It's over, and this whole scam.
So Roger calls you up and says you're going to lose?
No, he says, "Hey, can you come to Palm Beach or come to his house, the week after, the weekend after the thing?" And I go, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, this Trump TV thing, we ought to kick around. Do we have some alternatives? And I'm prepared to even walk away from the last year of my non-compete if we can put something together." And I go, because Roger, Ailes was kind of my mentor, and I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, come on down." I said, "Hey, we're winning. We're going to be putting a government together." And he said,
so Roger wanted to talk about the future in which after Donald Trump lost and build a new media empire.
And he believed,
and build a new media empire.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Against Fox.
Absolutely against Fox.
That's what he wanted to do.
Absolutely. He had one more round in the barrel. There's no doubt. Roger Ailes was incredibly aggressive about thinking about the future. Even when he died, he was planning on.
What did he contribute to the campaign?
He had come and just given us some ideas on the debate prep. He came and gave us all the stuff that he had. I think he had prepped Bush, and I think even
Bush 41.
Bush 41.
His media advisor.
Yes, and he told us about, and I think he did a great job with President Trump, candidate Trump at the time, of talking about the difference between a town hall and the different types of debates and how you have to answer domestic issues. He was great. I mean, he's well knowledge, but he believed the Fox polling. He thought we were going to lose by a couple of 3 points, and I said, "No way, we're winning this thing." So Donald Trump was not surprised. I wasn't surprised. Jared Kushner was not surprised. In fact, on the evening when we got the initial exit polls, they were so terrible and so off of what we had thought. I mean, getting crushed, losing everywhere. And even Ohio and Iowa, the two we thought we had bagged. I mean, dead even. And I'm sitting there, everybody told me, "Don't believe the polls." And Jared's sitting there, and Jared it calls Drudge on the phone, and Drudge chooses me out. And I could hear Drudge saying, he said, "Don't believe corporate media. These people are totally incompetent. They don't know what they're doing."
This is Drudge telling Jared?
Jared, because we had seen the numbers.
Drudge is telling this to Jared.
Jared, don't believe the exit polls. And they were terrible.
Oh, I see.
The exit polls had us getting blown out. That's when you see the coverage in the media that day. After I think it was 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock when the first set of exit polls came out, everybody's playing for an early night. They were all planning for this thing to be over by 9 o'clock. She was going to make her big acceptance speech, all that. You could see the entire tenor. It reaffirmed to these guys that Trump was going to lose and probably lose in a landslide. And I never wavered from the 100%, but I'm looking at the numbers, and Jared and I.
What was the conversation between you and Trump on election night?
Jared called Trump called the president right then, and the president said, "Let's see how it turns out. We don't know. Those are early numbers." So we said, "Hey, we'll hunker down," and then we just went back into the data room.
So Donald Trump had no doubt on election day that he was winning this election.
He might have had some reservations.
Yeah.
He might have had some reservations, but I think he felt he had left it all on the field. And in leaving the field, and particularly the culmination of that, to see those crowds. By the way, people waiting at one time in Virginia till like 2 o'clock in the morning. They've been there since 6 o'clock. We were so late. They've been there like 8 o'clock. You see the enthusiasm of those crowds. You see the intensity of this. You see the polls tightening. He definitely believed he was going to win.
We continue now with part 2 of my conversation with Steve Bannon, the former White House chief strategist and current executive chairman of Breitbart News. Portions of this conversation first aired Sunday on 60 Minutes and then for the hour on this program last night. Tonight, we talk about the transition and governing, plus the Trump agenda. I begin with the definition of populism.
Populism is anti-elitism. It's anti-crony capitalism. It is basically the voice of the people in this country saying that there is a corrupt, permanent political class in Washington, D.C., inextricably linked to the financiers on Wall Street and the high-tech community in Silicon Valley and in Hollywood that rule us. And that rule us despite what we want to happen. Have committed, basically, like I say, economic hate crime in standing aside and seeing the industrial base, the manufacturing base of this country be exported overseas. To see a rising middle class in Asia at the expense of the working class people in this country. And so populism is basically, it's anti-elite. I mean, what this movement has really, and what Donald Trump was able to galvanize is kind of what I call Jacksonian populism, which is always very, very concerned about an elite in Washington, D.C., with kind of Hamiltonian economic nationalism. The two great forces of the 19th century politics have really been combined into kind of this modern movement. We're very anti-elite. And the reason is the elites are incompetent. If they were so smart, we'd be in a better situation. They're completely and totally incompetent. Brexit and 2016 are inextricably linked, right? And that's why I started Breitbart London in 2013, early 2013, 2014, because I saw this guy, Nigel Farage, and this party, the UKIP, that was a populist party, an anti-establishment party. And I said, that's a canary in a mine shaft. We have to get a group there that sets up and covers that every day like Breitbart covers politics here, because by following UKIP, we're going to understand the evolution of the Tea Party.
But what about Le Pen in France? Lost.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. There's no doubt, I think, when you look around the world right now, that the two waves, the waves that are going is populism and nationalism, okay? Now, the question before us, I think, in the United States and in Europe, is it going to be a left-wing, more socialist populism, or is it going to be a center-right or right-wing populism? Now, Le Pen is culturally a right-winger, but economically, she's for state control. I mean, she's virtually a socialist. She has a very garbled message. It's not very clear at all. It's tough to galvanize people because she's all for state control, for the state to take back over certain industries. It's very different than a center-right coalition. What we have here in the States, right, you have in the United States now, or you see over there, Jeremy Corbyn. Right now, Jeremy Corbyn versus the Tories, with UKIP kind of hanging around as a third party. So that type of populism, this anti-elite populism that you see in Sherrod Brown, you see in Bernie Sanders, you see in the Bernie Sanders voters. By the way, in key districts, 15 to 16% of Sanders voters voted for Trump. Voted for Trump because they're economic nationalists and they want us out of...
Well, they were voting for change.
For change. By the way, let me just talk about the three basic components that we sold at the campaign is what the movement's about. Number one, he's going to stop mass illegal immigration and cut back dramatically legal immigration. Number two, he's going to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. And number three, he's going to get us out of these pointless foreign wars. That's the three basic touchstones of the Trump movement and Trumpism. There's all kind of stuff underneath there, building the wall and all sorts of stuff underneath. But that's the three broad categories. If you go back to the speeches, you can see that time and again. Stephen Miller would put that in the speeches, and that's really the change that people want. J.D. Vance was over here, and he said, Steve, it's amazing. I just read a study, I think it's a Harvard professor, that shows that there's a direct correlation between the factories that have moved to China and the manufacturing jobs and the opioid addiction, opioid crisis down to like the congressional district. So you can see that there's a correlation in this, and people know that. They understand that bringing back these manufacturing jobs are very important, and Trump articulated that.
So you win the election, you go through a transition. A lot of people thought might join the cabinet, didn't. Rudy, Newt, Christie. Can
I talk about the one important thing at the beginning of the transition? So the next morning after we win, Trump makes there's a very important decision made. and that is we put a coalition together to win. Reince Priebus, the RNC, the establishment. Now, Paul Ryan and people kind of came in and out as there were heated moments in the campaign. In fact, Ryan was on the last weekend of the campaign, waved us off coming to Wisconsin because he said, look, you guys are down 3 or so points. You're not going to win. It'll be a waste of time. And so we went to Minnesota instead, which we only lost by 1. But in the 48 hours after we won, there's a fundamental decision that was made. You might call it the original sin of the administration for some of the people on the right. But there was definitely, and you saw it that night in this acceptance speech when Reince was brought out and given the VIP treatment, we embraced the establishment. I mean, we totally embraced the establishment. I think in President Trump's mind, or President-elect Trump's mind, and in Jared's mind, in the family's mind, I actually agreed with the decision. Because you had to stand for government. And to be brutally frank, you know, the campaign, look, I'd never been on a campaign in my entire life, right? You know, I'm a former investment banker as a media guy, running a little website. Our whole campaign was a little bit the island of misfit toys. So he looks around and I'm wearing my combat jacket, I haven't shaved, I got, you know, my hair's down to here. And he says, he's thinking, hey, I've got to put together a government. I got to really staff out something. I need to embrace the establishment. And we did, because we had kind of won in a coalition. And so the whole thing with Obamacare.
I need to govern.
I need to govern. And by doing that, I need to govern. I need to govern. I need establishment people that are going to help with my Trump
So if
people.
he'd chosen Romney as Secretary of State, that would have been all right with you?
I was the one that recommended Romney come in to interview with Secretary of State. You know why? Because during the 2012 campaign, when Mitt Romney had the most traction, he was the biggest hawk on China. I wanted him to at least have a shot to come in because we were looking at a broad range of people. We looked at General Kelly for Secretary of State. We looked at a number of
David
Petraeus, even Admiral Stavridis came in and talked for DNI for Secretary of State. We looked at a wide range of people. Why not get Mitt Romney in? Let the president at least see people, let him do his own due diligence. I think as it went on, people had reservations about loyalty and about would he be a team player, et cetera. But at first, particularly given his angle of attack on China, I thought it was very smart.
Rex Tillerson came in because he was recommended by Bob Gates.
Yes, actually Tillerson was recommended by other people for energy. We didn't think he'd be interested. Bob Gates recommended him in the room, and Rex came up.
Rex Tillerson comes from one of the biggest establishment companies in the world, ExxonMobil.
He is a guy from Texas, though. He's a Texan.
So he gets a pass because he's from Texas?
No, but he and the president-elect spent a lot of time with each other. They had a very similar outlook in the world, on the Middle East, on Russia, maybe not so much in China, because Rex really went to China, but the Middle East and Russia, we thought were going to be two very big hot areas. Okay.
But all of a sudden, you're running against Washington, and you're running against the establishment and the people you're choosing to come in.
Some are establishment, some are very anti-establishment. But let's talk about bringing in establishment figures. You have to stand for government, right? Maybe you get people the second tier and the third tier, but you got to coach these people up. There's not a tremendous amount of anti-establishment folks that are prepared to step in and be Secretary of State. I mean, we talked about Rudy about it at length, and the decision was made that was not going to be Rudy. I mean, Rudy is one of the guys.
Why was that made? What was the decision?
Rudy went and did 6 shows on Billy Bush Sunday. He was the only person to win. Even people on the campaign would not go out there. Rudy went out there. To me, Rudy is a guy that's always going to have your back. On Billy Bush Sunday, he went on all 6 morning shows.
Well, you took names on Billy Bush Sunday, didn't you?
I did. I got him. I got it. You know, I'm Irish. I got my black book, and I got him. I'll never. Those indelibly.
If you weren't there for me on Billy Bush Sunday, then I won't be there for you when your ambition comes up.
I'll always know that when a guy like Trump runs to the gunfire, you're going to be back in the foxhole. May have to use you. By the way, Reince and I became great partners, and I really love the guy. In Reince, and by the way, it wasn't just Reince personally. He's a tough guy, but it was the donors. But Billy Bush, and by the way, Rudy was there. The president made a decision, okay? And Donald Trump's a great guy at weighing and measuring people. He loved Rudy, but he made a decision for what we needed at the time, that Rudy just wasn't going to be the Secretary of State that Donald Trump, felt he needed. Okay? And so, by the way,
he didn't look like a Secretary of State, and that mattered to Donald Trump. You know it did.
I think President Trump, it's just not the intelligence and the aspect of it. It's definitely how you comport yourself physically, right? So, but by the way, it wasn't Rudy.
You've heard him say this. That's why I'm telling you. And that's why you're smiling.
Rudy, we spent a lot of time with Rudy on being Attorney General, and a lot of time with Rudy being Department of
He only
Homeland
wanted to be
Security.
Secretary of State.
Only Secretary of State. He was very, one time I spent 5 hours on a Saturday with Rudy on both Attorney General and DHS, and it just, he was very adamant. It was either state or nothing.
And Newt?
Newt came in really, Newt could have had a pick of things too, and Newt was very upfront at the time. I've got more to do for you guys on the outside than being inside. He came to us right away and said, I don't want to be inside. Newt could have had his pick of what he wanted also. Sessions, Newt, Rudy, the guys that really been there the entire time. General Flynn. Those guys could have had, and that's why General Flynn was selected. Jared came to me right afterwards, and we talked, and General Flynn the president wanted General Flynn right out of the box, so General Flynn was selected right away. The people, General Kellogg, General Flynn, Rudy, Attorney General Sessions, etc. Christie, because of Billy Bush weekend, and was not looked at for a cabinet position.
He wasn't there for you on Billy Bush weekend, so therefore he doesn't get a cabinet position.
I told him the plane leaves at 11 o'clock in the morning. If you're on the plane, you're on the team. Didn't make the plane. That was on Saturday. Told him. Plane leaves at 11. Those who are on the team are going to be on the plane. We're going to St. Louis. Rudy was there. Rudy was on the plane. Governor Christie wasn't. All that nonsense about Jared Kushner firing him and everything like that couldn't be farther from the truth. I've never heard Jared say anything negative about Governor Christie. In fact, everything I've heard Jared ever say about Governor Christie has always been positive. So that whole nonsense the media plays up is Jared Kushner put the knife in it. It was purely on performance. And I like Governor Christie a lot. He's got tremendous attributes. And he added, by the way, on the last debate, he was the guy that prepped. He prepped. He came back and worked. But it was Billy Bush weekend that's always stuck in my mind.
January 20th, you take office. What did you want the president to do in that inaugural speech? Okay,
so it's not what Stephen Miller and I wanted to do. That speech, I'm telling you, Donald Trump worked on that speech down in Mar-a-Lago. He had and that speech is a very populist and very economic nationalist speech. It was a forceful speech. I believe it's as forceful in a way of more refined rhetoric than his acceptance speech at the convention. But it's a powerful speech. What we try to do in structure.
Nobody had heard an inaugural speech like that, ever.
I know. That's what I think is so powerful. It laid out really what Trump had won and what Trump was going to do. We took a little bit of the structure of Lincoln's second inaugural, in which he builds to a climax, and then war came. He goes through all the things that led to the Civil War, and then he hit that very powerful line, then war came. That's what we structured it. As President Trump was writing things, and then now arrives the hour of action. He builds the case for all the talk.
A call to arms.
Call to arms.
That's what that speech was.
Absolutely, 100%. He worked in that speech more than any speech he's ever worked on. One iteration after another. On the American Carnage line, the only thing I said at the time, I just wish, Stephen and I the night before, because it was going to rain, we spent virtually into the wee hours of the night making sure that the teleprompters work and there were cases over for the rain, so we're out there in that beautiful setting on a chilly night while it's drizzling and getting ready for it. And I told Stephen at the time, I said, if only we could turn the podium backwards and face the permanent political class. It's really the speech. We shouldn't give the speech out to the people. They know what he's going to say. We should turn it around.
So it's facing the Capitol.
Facing the Capitol and facing the permanent political class, because you're basically like an Old Testament prophet. You're laying out the bill of indictment against them and how you're the agent of change, and now you're here and there's a new sheriff in town. I thought it was very powerful.
Let's talk about the new sheriff and what he wanted to do. What was the highest priority for this president?
The highest priority, first off, was get the economy going. It was the economy, immigration, but let's talk about that, economic nationalism. We can see now in August of what he did with enforcement of the immigration laws and his whole effort to talk about how he's going to put up tariffs, how he's going to put up quotas, how it's going to be a new day in America. You must invest in this country, right? We're bringing manufacturing jobs back. We're in early September, right? Economic growth at 3%. We have no tax cut. And in fact, if you read the press, we don't even know if we're going to get a tax cut. They're still thinking about tax reform, tax cut. That's all in the future. He has 3% economic growth today, okay? He has lowest Hispanic unemployment in 11 years, lowest black unemployment in 16 years, lowest overall unemployment in 17 years. Wages in agriculture, particularly at the lowest level, wages in construction at the lowest level, are on the rise. We're seeing wage increases. You know what that is? That's economic nationalism. It's controlling illegal immigration, and it's letting the world know that if you want to be in business, you have to come to the United States. Business investment's up 10%, business confidence 20%. This is Donald Trump's...
America was built on the... America was, in the eyes of so many people, and it's what people respect America for. It is people who've been able to come here, find a place, contribute to the economy. That's what immigration has been in America. And you seem to want to turn it around and stop it.
You couldn't be more dead wrong. America was built on her citizens.
It began.
America was built on her citizens.
We're all immigrants.
America was built on her...
Except the Native Americans who are here.
Don't give me... This is the thing of the left that says, right. Charlie, that's beneath you. Right. America's built on our citizens. Look at the 19th century. What built America is called the American system. From Hamilton to Polk to Henry Clay to Lincoln to the Roosevelts. A system of protection of our manufacturing, financial system that lends to manufacturers, okay, and a control of our borders. The American system. Now, it's not that we're not anti-immigration. In fact, Donald Trump works with Tom Cotton and and Senator Perdue to come up with the RAISE Act that shows you that what we want is an immigration system that benefits America, an immigration system that's merit-based, that can assist and help American industry. It's not that we're anti-immigration at all. We're for citizens of the country, regardless of your race, your ethnicity, your religion, your sexual preference. Okay, the people who have been eviscerated by unlimited illegal immigration have been the Hispanic and black working class in this country. This was the power of what Trump did in his campaign, and what we talked about sessions at this very table. Trade and illegal immigration are two sides of the same coin, crushing the worker. The trade deals just bring the power of cheap international labor from its point of origin. Illegal immigration is just bringing that foreign labor to the United States. It's both crushing pressure on the working class in this country. And by the way, that's irrefutable. Bernie Sanders, back in the old days, was the biggest guy about stopping illegal immigration. So were the labor unions. That's why the rank and file votes for Donald Trump so overwhelmingly. It's quite simple what the problem is. And so, by the way, that's what we support, the RAISE Act. But I tell you what we don't support, H-1B visas. You talk about, in this country, you have the grammar schools. Everything's on a STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and math. We've done away with history, we've done away with art, we've done away with culture, because all the kids have to be STEM kids. But they can't get into the engineering schools, and they can't get jobs in Silicon Valley. Yet Silicon Valley consistently wants to bring in foreign labor from Asia to compete with them unfairly. Why is that? We're not going to solve the problem in this country until we have black and Hispanic kids in Silicon Valley and in the engineering schools. We have hundreds of thousands of kids from out the world, India and China, hang on, in our engineering schools, in our computer science schools, and you're not going to solve that until you open these things up to American citizens.
People have come here and made huge contributions to our economy, to our technology, to our science. And you don't want them to stay?
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said if you look at Cotton's RAISE Act, we have to do this. First off, should we have 1.1, 1.2 million immigrants every year? How did that number get picked? We've done that every year since 1964 when it was passed. How's that number pulled out of the hat? We have no earthly idea. What we want is a merit-based system so that those people that can contribute in a meaningful way can still come here, always be able to come here, okay? But we have citizens in this country that have to be taken care of, and that's the promise of Donald Trump. I'm looking out for you as a citizen. Okay, you're an American citizen, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're black, whether you're Jewish, whether you're evangelical Christian, whatever your sexual preference is, you're an American citizen. And guess what? I will defend your right to the job first.
Let's go down the list of what things that Donald Trump wanted. He wanted to do away with Obamacare, repeal and replace. It didn't happen.
Dad talked about the original sin of this administration. The very first meetings we had with the Republican establishment, here was the plan that was laid out. They would take Obamacare. There's a three-part program. They would take Obamacare, the repeal and replace. We would take the taxes, would be phase two, the tax reform, and then we would take Also, infrastructure would be phase 3. And people say, why don't you start with infrastructure first?
Right.
Well,
because you could get some Democrats involved.
But infrastructure is quite complex, particularly the way, by the way, you
so
have
you
to have...
postpone that to 2018.
Well, no, let me tell you the worst thing. No, it's worse than that. The plan was to do Obamacare because, remember, Paul Ryan and these guys come in and said, we've done this for 7 years. We've voted on this 50 times. We understand this issue better than anybody. We know how to repeal and we know how to replace, and this is ours. That's where we're going to start with day one, and we will have something on your desk by Easter. By the Easter break, we'll do repeal and replace. Come back from Easter and all the way up to the August break, taxes. Come back from the summer break on Labor Day, and we drive home to the end of the year on infrastructure. We accomplish all 3 big legislative goals in the first year. They would take...
This is what the leadership in the House and Senate told you.
And we agreed to... That was the deal.
So you're now blaming them for all of this.
I'm not blaming this. I'm not blaming this for all this. What I'm saying is that, as a statement of fact, that they were going to take repeal and replace Obamacare, and they're the first to admit. They're the first to admit that there's wide dissension inside the Republican caucus. There's wide dissension. They couldn't even repeal it. When left to even repeal it in June, when in the Senate they put up for a vote, they only had 41 votes. There is wide discrepancy in the Republican Party, as we know today. Now that we're in it, but I will tell you, leadership didn't know that at the time. They didn't know it to the very end. And let me tell you about Obamacare. There's something that's being worked on right now by Lindsey Graham and Cassie, and Rick Santorum, which is really modeled on the 1996 welfare reform, where it devolves it back to the states. That is probably the highest probability we have, and probably the one last shot we have to fix Obamacare.
Have we come to that where the choice is simply to fix Obamacare?
I think the choice is going to be you're not going to be able to totally repeal it. I think the taxes will stay in place. I think some of the other things will stay in place. I don't believe that there's an alternative now, at least on this alternative that Rick Santorum and them are working on, that you get a full repeal of Obamacare. You're still going to have some of the architecture. And by the way, you're still going to have, at least right now, the taxes in it. And I think that's just a reality. And by the way, that was not thought of by the Republican establishment. Remember, they told us, we have done this for 7 years. This has been our #1 issue against Obama, is Obamacare. In fact, we have Tom Price. He's going to be he should be your Secretary of HHS, because he's the intellectual leader in this effort. And so that whole effort, and as we saw as we got into it, you see from the debate, you could see from what was happening every day, that the Republicans themselves did not have their hands around this issue.
Travel Bannon. It's now looked as your baby. What happened?
What do you mean what happened? I think the travel ban is very successful. I think the Supreme Court's going to uphold the key parts of it in the fall. And I think
could it have been drafted better?
In fact, President Trump likes the original draft. You got to remember something on this. Everybody says, oh, it's just shoved out in the middle of the night. To go through an interagency process, you have to have an executive order. And by the way, the mainstream media knows this. You have to have the Office of Legal Counsel over the Department of Justice sign off on it. We had this thing, interagency process. We had already started in the transition period. We had 2 EOs. The other one was the enforcement EO that came underneath it, right? The one about the enforcement of the deportations. These EOs were fully vetted. And by the way, General Kelly has said in public testimony they were fully on board to do it. Were there a couple of wrinkles? Yeah, there were a couple of wrinkles. But you know what he found out? It's about extreme vetting, okay? It's about extreme vetting. And we have found out we didn't know a whole lot about how you actually vet people coming to this country. I think the travel ban has been enormously successful, and the key parts of it will be upheld in the Supreme Court.
It is said, or you at least have said, when you saw the number of people lining up at the airports being detained because they couldn't get in because of the travel ban on the first day, that you said that was a very successful optic.
I did not say that. I said something quite different. Not about the people. And by the way, that was administrative confusion. And for the people coming in, clearly, you don't want people that you know should have come in to have anything that would delay their trip. What I thought was a good optic was the resistance. The resistance. The resistance started that weekend. The resistance is going to keep the House of Representatives in Republican hands. The resistance was so over the top, right? So insane. So the resistance is what, on Joe Scarborough every morning, what they talk about, like in Georgia. They say, hey, if you had a Chamber of Commerce, church-going, Little League coach, entrepreneur running in these things against Republicans, they'd win by 20 points. Yeah, well, they would, okay? Or they would be very competitive. guess what? They're not going to be Democratic candidates. And you know why? The resistance. The best you're going to get is, was it Ossoff down in Georgia? That's the best you're going to get. Because the resistance.
He lost.
He did lose, but that's the best you're going to get. The resistance is going to force people in primaries to the left. So what occurred, which we didn't even think of, was the resistance. And you see the resistance is so outside the American mainstream, okay? They are so over the top. They will drive the Democratic Party exactly where they shouldn't go, which is they should go more to the middle. They should go to more economic nationalism and populism. And the resistance will stop that. And that's why you're not going to have competitive candidates.
You believe the Democrats are talking about simply being anti-Trump rather than being pro-economic?
The smart ones, the Tim Ryans, the Sherrod Browns, you can see it out there. They're talking about the economic issues that could be a platform Democrats win, but most of the Democrats are so, remember, it goes back to trying to destroy Trump. President Trump triggers the left, and they can't handle it rationally, okay? And so as long as they can't handle it rationally, they're not going to defeat him.
Why is he at 30-some% approval rating?
I think he's at 30. I think it's 36 or 38% because he hasn't. We haven't gotten the wall built. We haven't done. If you just go through and just do the Trump program that he laid out and just punch those things out, you're going to do fine. You're going to beat your 47%.
I mean, you withdrew from Paris. There's now talk you may not try to undo the Iran nuclear deal.
Decertify?
Right.
I wouldn't bet on that.
But there is talk about that.
Definitely talk. The apparatus wants him to continue to certify. President Trump wants to get the deal and either go make a better deal or just view it from the outside.
Have you cleaned the swamp?
Well, first off, okay, the swamp is 50 years in the making. Let's talk about the swamp. The swamp is a business model. It's a successful business model. It's a donor, consultant, K Street lobbyist, politician. 7 of the 9 biggest, most wealthiest counties in America ring Washington, D.C. For the first time in history, the per capita income in those counties is higher than Silicon Valley.
What are you talking about when you talk about the swamp? You're talking about the lobbyists and the people.
The permanent political class is represented by both parties. Okay? This is not, people still think in a left-right continuum, a Republican and Democrat continuum. While you continue to think that way, you're not seeing what the real story is. The real story is economic nationalism and populism on the left and the right versus a permanent political class, of which Hillary Clinton represented. That swamp, you're not going to drain that in 8 months. You're not going to drain it in 2 terms. This is going to take 10, 15, 20 years of relentlessly going after it. So now, Trump in his first 8 months has done, I think, amazingly. He's forced the people who work for him. You can't lobby.
So your takeaway on the Trump administration so far is what?
Is that it's hammering through what it's trying to hammer through to deliver on the promises that President Trump made to the American people when he campaigned. And if he just continues to go down that path and punch out those promises he made, he's going to win. We're going to win in 18 where we'll pick up 6 or 7 Senate seats. I think we'll pick up a couple of seats in the House. And he'll win in a huge landslide in 20.
So
if he does
2018 is going to be a big year for you?
2018.
You're not worried about losing the House? You're not worried about losing the Senate?
I'm worried about losing the House now because of DACA. And I'll tell you why. DACA, this whole situation with DACA over the last 24, 48 hours, which I think has to be sorted out, the whole issue of amnesty was put to bed in 2013 in the great civil war that occurred in that summer in the Republican Party. The predicate of Donald Trump's winning of the nomination was that issue of amnesty. Remember, when he beat 16 people, that was the creme de la creme of a generation of Republican politicians. You had Chris Christie and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Jeb Bush. I mean, this was the best of the best. I think it's the best field that's ever been, and Trump beat him. One of the reasons he beat him, he was so different on immigration and trade, but particularly on immigration. Right? And there was very few that were there. And by the way, so that got, to me, absolutely sealed it. Amnesty is non-negotiable in the Republican Party. The Gang of 8 and Marco Rubio made a bet. He made a bet. The New York Times reported it. That dinner that he had with, I think, Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes, Schumer, in January 2013, same time that Sessions and I met here, they had the thing about taking the autopsy, and then taking the autopsy and building Gang of 8, and they would roll it out into the summer of 2013, Marco Rubio made a bet that that would make him president of the United States, and he was wrong. Amnesty has been non-negotiable in the Republican Party, and my fear is that with this 6 months downrange, if we have another huge, if this goes all the way down to its logical conclusion in February and March, it will be a civil war inside the Republican Party that will be every bit as vitriolic as 2013. And to me, doing that in the springboard of primary season for 2018 is extremely unwise. This is extremely unwise. You have the ability right now to pick up 5 or 6 seats in the Senate in red states. You have the ability, I think, to hold the House and maybe even pick up a couple. Because right now, by the way, guys are down. Those districts that Republican congressman won that Hillary Clinton won, if you look on the generic ballot, they're down 10 points. I admit that. But once you put the candidate up, once you put the resistance candidate up, and that's what you're going to get, the resistance is going to give you not the Little League coach and not the guy from the Chamber of Commerce, is going to give you a resistance candidate. Those Republicans will beat them every time. And so that's why I feel confident until DACA. And I think this is a huge problem. I think it's a huge problem.
The president made the wrong decision?
I think the wrong decision. You wanted him to go full bore.
I think what we have to do is focus on the American citizens. I think we have to focus on American citizens.
So what would you do with the people who came here?
I think that you saw the memo. You saw the memo.
But just tell me what you would do. That's all I'm asking.
I think as the work permits run out, they self-deport.
They self-deport.
Yes, I am absolutely.
But that's being deported.
I am absolutely.
If they don't self-deport, you're going to deport them.
I am absolutely, and I think the people that go to Breitbart and others are absolutely that there's no path to citizenship, no path to a green card, and no amnesty. Okay. Amnesty is non-negotiable.
You've said that. You got your deal on climate. The president withdrew from Paris. Pleased you?
Only the start. Hasn't withdrawn from the substrate of Paris. The other agreements that I think you ought to withdraw from.
You think you should do that?
Oh, absolutely, no doubt. Hey, but remember, part of his program.
You don't think it hurt the country's reputation overseas?
Absolutely not. No, I think that's ridiculous and silly. But that's all the party of Davos. That's all the party of Davos talking to themselves. You read The Economist and the Financial Times, and you take it as holy writ.
Who does?
Okay, all the elites. All the elites take it. Your question right there. No, that not only is that deal, it was terrible for the United States of America. Okay, President Trump's program of energy
in your own party.
By the way, people in our own party disagree with a lot. I didn't say there's not people. By the way, people in our party disagree with a lot of what. By the way, that's why there's a new party forming. You see inside the Republican Party, it's a populist and more economic nationalist. There's plenty of globalists inside the Republican Party.